The Ghanaian Goldilocks. A story by Dr. Tamara Pizzoli. In the West African city of Accra, not so long ago, in a country that was once called Gold Coast, but is now known as Ghana, there lived a young boy by the name of Kofi. It is a name given to many Ghanaian boys who are born on Friday. Much like other children around his age, Kofi delighted in games and fun. He could most often be found down on the beach with his friends, finding seashells just the right size for playing pombo, perfecting his handstands in the water, or lying belly up in the sand wondering about the things his mama said would take time to understand. When it was time to call her son in for lunch or dinner, Kofi's mother, Abina, rarely had a hard time spotting him. Having spent the better part of each day outside, the sun had soaked up the dark pigment in his hair, eventually leaving him with a healthy patch of nearly gold, blonde coils. As Kofi grew, so did his hair. It grew and grew until it twisted and stretched like the dreadlocks of some of the fishermen who caught and sold seafood by Elmina Castle in Cape Coast. Sister Ajoa, who crafted her own shea butter by hand and sold it at the Makola market by Kofi's house, had been the one to give him the nickname. "I think we might have a blonde one on our hands, eh now, Abina?" She laughed, tugging and elongating one curl and letting it spring back suddenly. She tussled Kofi's mop and attempted to run her fingers through it. "I think a better fitting name for you, sweet Kofi, is Goldilocks, at least till you cut it all off." And it stuck. Before long, everyone in Kofi's part of town, and many others outside of it, knew the brown boy with the blonde hair as Goldilocks. Though it didn't bother him, not much, to not be called by his birth name, Goldilocks did notice that his tresses made it difficult for him to get away with much of anything, but they certainly didn't stop him from trying. Like the time he and his friends accidentally kicked the ball into his neighbour Sister Francine's yard, and Goldilocks jumped the dividing wall to get it instead of knocking on the door and asking permission first. His mama knew about it before he made it back to his family side. Sister Francine called and asked if you'd kindly notify her before inviting yourself onto her property. His mama yelled from inside the kitchen, just after he'd planted both feet on the pavement. "All right, mama," he replied. All the time his mama sent him to do the shopping, and Brayo from the fruit stand told him he could help himself to 3 coconuts. A 4th somehow ended up in his sack. When he returned, his mama was waiting at the front door, and he hadn't even gotten all the way inside the gate before she started in. "Seems to me an arithmetic lesson may be in order," Brayo said. "You mistook 4 for 3. Stunned, the child mumbled and fumbled his words, searching for an explanation. "No use in trying," his mama began. "I'm your mama. This neighborhood is your family, a big family, and I'm always gonna know now. To go take that coconut back to Brayo and say what needs to be said. Go on now." "Yes, mama. Sorry, mama," Kofi replied. And so it happened that weeks and months passed and everything was as it should have been, until the day Mama Abina was making spinach stew and jollof rice, and she ran out of tomatoes. "Kofi, please run next door and ask Sister Francine if we can borrow some tomatoes." The boy did as he was asked, but when he knocked on Sister Francine's door, there was no answer. There was also no point in going home and telling his mother the neighbours weren't home. He knew she'd just send him to the next neighbour's house. So there he went. The home had been all but abandoned for some time, but recently the neighbourhood kids had noticed movement in and around it. Kofi knocked lightly on the door. There was no response, and at that very instant he saw that the door was slightly ajar, pushing ever so softly, just enough to peek into the kitchen. he spied 3 inviting bowls of homemade fufu and palm nut stew waiting on the counter. The aroma was so delicious and tempting, not to mention it would be ages before Mama Abina's stew would be ready. He still didn't even have the tomatoes. Just a taste, he told himself, rushing quickly inside and slamming the door behind him. First, Goldilocks tried the fufu in the biggest bowl, and he nearly burned off his index finger and thumb. "Aye!" he cried. Determined to have a taste of the dough and broth, Kofi tried the fufu in the medium-sized bowl next. It was cool. In fact, it was way too cold for his taste. Moving on, he tried the fufu in the little bowl, and it was perfect. It was better than perfect. It was downright delicious. So delicious that before he could stop himself, Goldilocks had swallowed every single clump of fufu whole and was slurping down the savoury soup. "Mummy," he burped, which means "I'm full" in his native language of Twi. Kofi had every intention of going home right then, but the bright colours from the living room caught his eye. He moved toward the space slowly and cautiously, checking the door ever so often to make sure no one was coming. Instinctively, he walked over to the semicircle of 3 stalls. Having eaten such a heavy lunch, the thought of relaxing for a minute or two didn't seem like a bad idea. First, Goldilocks had a seat on the big stool, but it was hard as rock. Next, Goldilocks tried the medium-sized stool that bore the carving of the sandcrawler bird, but with 4 pillars stacked on top. It was nearly impossible for him to balance on the seat. Finally, Goldilocks tried the littlest stool, and it was just right. It was better than right. It was perfect, and so multifunctional. With his imagination, it could instantly transform into a bed or a horse or a boat or a pirate ship or a trampoline. Goldilocks jumped and jumped to his heart's contentment, and then, thwat, the stool split in half. And there lay Goldilocks, flat on his rear in the middle of the mess. "Aye!" he cried as he scanned the damage. Had he followed his first mind, Kofi would have left the home right then and there, but curiosity got the best of him again. He'd seen most of the house, but not the bedrooms. "I'll just take a quick look," he said to himself as he brushed off his backside and walked into an enormous bedroom shared by 3. His eyes were immediately drawn to the intricate carvings of the doors of 3 wardrobe closets. Running his hands over the designs of the largest one, he decided to take a look inside. The heavy wood creaked as Kofi struggled to open the door, and the child stood a moment and marvelled at what was revealed. It wasn't the Western-inspired clothes or shoes that held his gaze, but a beautiful assortment of kente cloth that stretched from the floorboard to the very top of the closet. Goldilocks permitted himself to stroke every cloth he could reach, thinking about the stories each one had to tell. Being aware that his mother would soon begin to wonder about his whereabouts, Kofi rushed along to the medium-sized closet, the door of which flew open at the slightest tug. He smiled at the array of hats and head wraps, sandals and slippers, dresses, gowns, leggings, trunks, tunics, and of course, kente cloth. It all reminded him of Mama Abina. Kofi ran his finger along his distressed leather of a pair of sandals that looked like they might be the owner's favourite. He picked up one shoe, eyeing the detailed stitching, and after giving it a once-over, he placed it upside down on top of its mate. Leaving that closet door slightly cracked, Kofi finally stood in front of the very last closet, the little one. Ignoring the "Keep Out" sign plastered on the front, Goldilocks grabbed both doorknobs with his 2 hands and pulled. Once open, Kofi could see that the space served as storage for both attire and toys. He spent a minute or two fiddling around with what was inside. A zither, a wooden boat with fishermen, a drum, a xylophone made with 3 calabashes, a tambourine, tiny village people, and a flute. Not wanting to make too much noise or leave too much evidence, he tried to place the instruments and playthings exactly where he'd first found them. Just when he was about to close the closet door and leave, he noticed the clothes, all of which seemed so remarkably familiar. He was sure he had some of the exact same shirts and pants, even shoes. Maybe we even wear the same size, Goldilocks mumbled softly, and while thumbing through a small assortment of kente cloth, he made a spur-of-moment decision to try on a couple of things. At that very moment, the Ose family walked in the front door carrying the last load of moving boxes from their old home in Kumasi. It took Papa Akufo no time at all to realize that something just wasn't right. But before he had a chance to speak, Mama Nasima and their son Kwaku gasped. Papa Akufo walked over to the counter, peered into his bowl of fufu, then announced in a booming voice, "Someone's been dipping their fingers in my fufu." Mama Nasima examined her bowl. "Someone's been in my fufu too," she exclaimed. Wide-eyed Kwaku shrieked, "Someone's been dipping their fingers in my fufu and it's all gone." The family moved suspiciously into the living room, where they were left flabbergasted by the entire scene. Papa Akufo sat on his giant stool and knowingly nodded. Someone's been sitting on my stool." Mama Nasima didn't even have to sit down to know what had happened. The small button print on the top pillow told her everything she needed to know. Pointing and shaking her head in disbelief, she cried, "Someone's been sitting on my stool." Kwaku, understandably so, was the most shocked and shaken of all. "Someone's been sitting on my stool and they broke it too." Meanwhile, Goldilocks had heard the front door close. He'd listened to the family and their conversation as they moved through their home. He stood frozen in a stranger's clothes, panicking, not knowing what to do. He had options, he thought to himself. Eyeing the window, he could hop out, run home, and no one would know the difference. No one would know it was he who'd been in the Ose home. He had a decision to make. Anger and confusion led the Ose family to their bedroom, where Papa Akufo noted that his closet door had been left slightly open. "Let me guess," Mama Nasima began. "Somebody's been looking through your closet." "You know it," Papa Akufo replied. Mama Nasima walked over to her wardrobe closet and straightened the pair of sandals Kofi had left out of place. "No surprise here," she sighed. "Someone's been looking through my closet." The parents turned to find their son staring at another figure that hadn't noticed was present. As Kofi braced himself for the worst, Kwaku spoke. "Looks like someone has been going through my closet and liked what they saw." Kofi stood trembling in front of the family. He'd made a decision. He'd chosen to listen to the subtle voice in his mind that was always there, the one that urged him to do the right thing, even when the consequences are unknown. Frightened and unsure of himself, he tried to explain. I don't, well, I just, what happened was Just then there was a knock on the front door. "Hold that thought," Papa Akufo told Goldilocks, eyeing him intently. "I want to hear every word of what you have to say for yourself." When he opened the front door, he was greeted first by Goldilocks' mother, Mama Abina. Behind her stood all the neighbours and even some friends from across town. "I understand my son is here," Mama Abina began. Chimed in Sister Francine. "I told it. The child went in and didn't ever come out, so I called his mama." Papa Akufo nodded. "Well," Mama Abina said, "we figured this was a good time as any to welcome you and your family to our neighbourhood." Akwaba, welcome, and of course, I come to get my son. Papa Akufo stepped aside and the neighbours filed in carrying an array of wonderful delights. There was jollof rice, plantain, kenge, masa, kebabs, fufu, fried fish, sweet donuts, and oh, so much more. The roar of laughter and good conversation soon filled the house completely. Goldilocks tapped his mother gently on her back. His head hung low. She lifted his chin and silently walked him over to the Osei family. Goldilocks spoke slowly and deliberately. I am sorry I came into your home without permission. I should not have eaten your fufu, and I apologize for breaking your stool. And Papa Akufo interrupted him mid-sentence. You precious and precocious child. Remember this day and the lesson that you have learned. It is a lesson I, along with many wise Ashanti elders in this room, learned when we were around your age. It is my job to make you feel at home when you come to my home. It is your job to remember you are not at home. A burst of laughter erupted and shouts of agreement echoed through the home and could be heard all the way down the road and to the city limits of Accra. Some say it was all heard as far as Kumasi.